The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Marcus Williams stepped out onto the 40th floor of Sterling & Associates, carrying his cleaning cart as he had every evening for the past 3 years. What nobody in that gleaming corporate tower knew was that behind his quiet demeanor and humble work uniform lay a secret that would soon shake the very foundations of the company. The marble floors reflected the city lights below as Marcus began his routine, but tonight felt different. Tonight, everything would change. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and like for more amazing stories like this one. You won't believe what happens next. Marcus had grown accustomed to being invisible. Executives rushed past him in the hallways without a glance, their expensive shoes clicking against the polished floors as they discussed million-dollar deals and strategic partnerships. He was part of the furniture to them, useful, necessary, but ultimately forgettable. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see James Sterling III, the company's newly appointed CEO, standing with his arms crossed. At 28, James had inherited his position through family connections rather than experience, and his arrogance preceded him into every room. "You missed a spot yesterday," James said, pointing to an imaginary mark on the pristine floor. "I expect better attention to detail from the cleaning staff." Marcus nodded quietly. "I'll take care of it right away, sir." "See that you do, and next time, try to be more thorough. This is a professional environment, not some—" James paused, his eyes scanning Marcus's work uniform with disdain. "Budget operation." As James walked away, his expensive Italian shoes echoing down the corridor, Marcus continued his work. But what James didn't know was that Marcus had been listening to every conversation, observing every business decision, and quietly taking notes on every strategic move the company made. You see, Marcus Williams wasn't just a janitor, but the full truth of who he really was would have to wait. But the real shock was yet to come. 3 hours later, Marcus finished cleaning the executive conference room where tomorrow's board meeting would take place. As he arranged the chairs around the mahogany table, he noticed a folder left behind by one of the executives. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold. Plans to lay off 200 employees to boost quarterly profits. Marcus had seen this pattern before. In his previous life, before he took this job, he had witnessed countless companies sacrifice their workforce for short-term gains. The memories of what happened to his former colleagues still haunted him, but tonight, he was in a position to do something about it. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the documents, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was seeing. These weren't just numbers on a page. They were people with families, mortgages, and dreams that were about to be shattered. What happened next would change everything. The following morning, Marcus arrived early, as he always did. He had a special meeting to attend, one that would finally reveal the truth about who he really was. The board members began filing into the conference room at exactly 9 a.m., their faces grave as they prepared to discuss the layoffs. James Sterling III took his place at the head of the table, shuffling through his papers with the confidence of someone who believed his word was law. "Gentlemen, ladies, today we make some difficult but necessary decisions about our workforce." That's when Marcus knocked on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Marcus said, still wearing his janitor's uniform, "but there's something you all need to know." James's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "This is a private meeting. Security, please," Marcus said, raising his hand. "Just give me 2 minutes. I think you'll find what I have to say very interesting." The board members looked confused, but something in Marcus's tone made them pause. There was an authority there that hadn't been present during his interactions as the building's janitor. 2 minutes, said Eleanor Rodriguez, the board's longest-serving member. "Then we call security." Marcus walked to the front of the room and placed a folder on the table. "My name is Marcus Williams, and I am the majority shareholder of this company." The silence that followed was deafening. James laughed nervously. "That's impossible. You're a janitor. I've seen you cleaning toilets." Marcus opened the folder and spread out documents across the conference table. Stock certificates, legal papers, and corporate filings that told a story none of them had expected. 3 years ago, I sold my tech company, Williams Innovation, to a private equity firm for $240 million. Marcus explained, his voice calm but commanding. "I used a portion of those proceeds to quietly purchase shares in Sterling and Associates through various shell companies and investment vehicles. Currently, I own 47% of this company." Eleanor Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the documents. Her face had gone pale. "These appear to be legitimate." "But why?" stammered Robert Chen, the CFO. "Why work as a janitor if you're—" "Because I wanted to understand this company from the ground up," Marcus replied. "I wanted to see how it treats its employees, how decisions are made, and whether the leadership truly cares about the people who make this company profitable." And what he had discovered would shock them all. Marcus continued, "For 3 years I've watched this company's leadership make decision after decision that prioritizes profit over people. I've seen employees work overtime without proper compensation. I've witnessed discrimination in hiring practices. And I've observed a culture that views workers as expendable resources rather than valuable human beings." James's confidence was crumbling. "You can't just waltz in here and—" "Actually, I can," Marcus interrupted, pulling out another document. "According to the corporate bylaws, any shareholder with more than 40% ownership has the right to call for emergency board action and, if necessary, removal of executive leadership." The room erupted in whispers and heated discussions. Board members were frantically making phone calls to their lawyers, while James sat in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief and growing panic. "The layoffs you plan to announce today," Marcus said, placing the photographed documents on the table, "would have devastated 200 families while adding $50 million to the company's cash reserves. Money that would primarily benefit executive bonuses and shareholder dividends." But Marcus wasn't finished yet. "However, I have a different proposal," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "Instead of layoffs, we're going to invest in our people. We're going to raise the minimum wage for all employees to $25 an hour, implement a profit-sharing program, and establish a $10 million fund for employee education and training." Eleanor Rodriguez looked up from the documents. "Marcus, these are your legitimate shares. You do have the authority to make these changes. But the financial impact will be minimal in the long term," Marcus finished. "Happy, well-compensated employees are more productive, more loyal, and more innovative. The companies I've invested in that prioritize their workforce consistently outperform those that don't." James finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "You've been planning this for 3 years." "Not planning," Marcus corrected. "Hoping. I hoped that Sterling and Associates would prove to be different. I hoped that when I eventually revealed myself, it would be to congratulate a company that was already doing right by its people." He paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from shocked to ashamed to cautiously hopeful. "Unfortunately, that's not what I found. The next revelation would be even more stunning." Marcus walked to the window, overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back. 3 years ago, when I was running Williams Innovation, we went through a difficult period. A larger competitor was trying to force us out of the market by undercutting our prices and spreading false information about our products. He turned back to face the board. "We had 2 choices: lay off half our workforce to cut costs, or find another way. I chose to take a salary cut, convinced our executive team to do the same, and we worked together to find innovative solutions to our problems." "What happened?" asked Sarah Kim, the head of human resources. "We not only survived, but we thrived. Our employees' loyalty and dedication during that difficult time led to breakthrough innovations that made our company more valuable than ever. When I eventually sold Williams Innovation, every single employee received a bonus equivalent to 6 months' salary." Marcus returned to the table and sat down, finally claiming his rightful place in the room. "That experience taught me that a company is only as strong as the people who believe in its mission. If you treat your employees as disposable, they'll treat your company the same way." What happened next would determine the future of everyone in that room. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The weight of Marcus's revelation and his challenge to the company's direction hung heavy in the air. Finally, Eleanor Rodriguez broke the silence. "Marcus, assuming everything you've shown us checks out, and I believe it will, what exactly are you proposing?" Marcus leaned forward. I'm proposing that we become the company our employees deserve. Starting today, James Sterling III is relieved of his duties as CEO. James shot to his feet. You can't do this. My family built this company. Your grandfather built this company. Marcus corrected. Your father expanded it. You've been running it into the ground for the past 2 years. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time low. Client retention has dropped 15%, and 3 of our best department heads have left for competitors. The board members were frantically checking their phones and tablets, confirming Marcus's ownership claims and researching his background. What they found only reinforced his credibility. Williams Innovation, murmured Robert Chen, reading from his phone. You revolutionized mobile security protocols. Your patents are still industry standard. And you've been cleaning our toilets, added Sarah Kim, shaking her head in amazement. But the biggest surprise was still to come. Marcus stood up and walked to a closet in the corner of the conference room. He opened it and pulled out a suit bag, revealing an impeccably tailored navy blue suit. I've been carrying this to work every day for 6 months, he said with a slight smile. Waiting for the right moment. As he prepared to change, he turned back to the board. I want to be clear about something. I didn't take this job to humiliate anyone or to play some elaborate game. I took it because I needed to understand what Sterling & Associates really was before I decided whether to invest more heavily or divest completely. He paused, looking directly at James. I had hoped to find a company worth saving. What I found was a company worth rebuilding. 20 minutes later, Marcus Williams returned to the conference room, transformed. Gone was the janitor's uniform, replaced by the attire of a successful executive, but more than his appearance had changed. His entire presence commanded the room in a way that his humble disguise had hidden. Now, he said, taking a seat at the head of the table where James had been sitting earlier, let's talk about the future of this company. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined his vision for Sterling & Associates. He proposed restructuring the executive compensation packages to tie bonuses directly to employee satisfaction scores and long-term company performance, rather than quarterly profits. He suggested implementing a mentorship program, where senior employees would train junior staff, creating career advancement opportunities and improving job security. He also recommended establishing an innovation fund, where employees could propose and develop new ideas, with successful innovations resulting in shared profits. But what about the shareholders? Asked Eleanor. Some of these changes will impact short-term profitability. Marcus smiled. I am the largest shareholder, and I'm willing to accept lower short-term profits for sustainable long-term growth. When employees feel valued and secure, they perform better. When they perform better, the company grows. When the company grows, everyone benefits. He pulled out his laptop and connected it to the conference room's display screen. Let me show you some data from my previous companies. The charts and graphs that appeared showed impressive growth curves for businesses that had implemented employee-focused policies, productivity increases, customer satisfaction improvements, and ultimately, higher profitability over 3 to 5 year periods. What the board members saw next would convince them of Marcus's vision. This is Williams Innovation's performance data, Marcus explained, pointing to a dramatic upward trend line. The yellow section shows our growth after we implemented profit sharing and invested in employee development. The green section shows what happened when we gave employees equity stakes in major projects. Robert Chen leaned forward, studying the numbers. These results are remarkable. But how do we know they'll translate to Sterling & Associates? We don't, Marcus admitted. But we know what happens when we continue down the current path. Employee turnover, decreased productivity, client dissatisfaction, and ultimately, company decline. He clicked to the next slide, showing Sterling & Associates' performance metrics over the past 2 years. The trends were unmistakably negative. We can continue to manage decline, or we can invest in growth, Marcus said. I've already made my choice by purchasing these shares. Now I'm asking all of you to make yours. Sarah Kim raised her hand. What about the employees who don't know any of this yet? How do we handle the transition? Marcus had clearly thought about this. We call an all-hands meeting this afternoon. We explain that there's been a change in leadership and that we're implementing new policies designed to benefit everyone. We don't need to explain my background in detail, but we do need to be transparent about our commitment to treating employees fairly. The decision that would change 8047 lives was about to be made. Eleanor Rodriguez looked around the table at her fellow board members. All in favor of accepting Marcus Williams as interim CEO and implementing the proposed changes? One by one, hands rose around the table. Even some of the members who had initially seemed skeptical were nodding their approval. The data Marcus had presented was too compelling to ignore. James Sterling III sat slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in.
"What happens to me?" he asked quietly.
Marcus considered this carefully. You have two options, James. You can work with our transition team to find a position at another company where your skills might be better utilized, with a generous severance package and positive references. He paused. Or you can stay here and learn how to run a company properly. Start at an entry-level management position. Work your way up and prove that you can lead through service rather than entitlement. The offer surprised everyone, including James himself. But Marcus wasn't finished with his surprises. There's one more thing, Marcus said, pulling out a final document. The reason I was able to purchase so many shares without anyone noticing was that Sterling & Associates has been undervalued by the market for years. He placed the document on the table. I commissioned an independent valuation of the company based on its assets, client base, and growth potential. With proper management and employee investment, Sterling & Associates is worth approximately $2 billion. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Currently, the market cap is $1.4 billion. Marcus continued, which means that every person in this room and every employee in this company is sitting on unrealized potential worth over $1 billion. Robert Chen's calculator was working overtime. If we implement profit sharing and employee equity programs, every long-term employee becomes significantly more wealthy, Marcus finished. The janitor who's been here for 15 years, the secretary who knows every client's preferences, the junior analyst who catches errors that save millions, they all benefit from the company's success. Eleanor Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. You could have fired everyone, restructured the company, and kept all the profits for yourself. I could have, Marcus agreed. But I've learned that success means nothing if you achieve it by stepping on others. True wealth isn't just about money, it's about building something meaningful that improves people's lives. The final revelation would seal their commitment to change. As the meeting was concluding, Marcus stood up and walked to the window again. The city sprawled out below them, millions of people going about their daily lives, most of them struggling to make ends meet and find meaning in their work. 3 years ago, I was exactly where James is now, Marcus said quietly. Wealthy, successful, and completely disconnected from the people who made my success possible. He turned back to the room. I had an employee named Dorothy Washington. She was our head of customer service, and she'd been with the company for 12 years. One day, she didn't come to work. When we called, we learned she'd had a heart attack and couldn't afford the medical bills. Marcus's voice grew heavy with emotion. Dorothy had been working 2 jobs to support her granddaughter, whose parents had died in a car accident. Our company insurance barely covered basic medical care, and she'd been rationing her heart medication to save money. The room was completely silent. I flew to the hospital that day and paid her medical bills. But as I sat in that waiting room, surrounded by families facing the same impossible choices between health and financial survival, I realized that all my success meant nothing if the people who helped me achieve it couldn't even afford to stay alive. He returned to his seat, his eyes meeting those of each board member. Dorothy survived, thankfully. She's now the head of customer experience at a company I help run in Portland, with full medical coverage, a living wage, and equity in the business. She's also one of the happiest people I know. The decision was unanimous. That's why I'm here, Marcus concluded. Not to get richer, but to create the kind of company where no employee ever has to choose between their health and their paycheck. Where people can build careers, not just survive jobs. Where success is measured not just by profits, but by the positive impact we have on the lives of everyone who walks through these doors. Eleanor Rodriguez wiped away a tear. I move to officially appoint Marcus Williams as CEO of Sterling & Associates, effective immediately. Seconded, came voices from around the table. James Sterling III stood up slowly. Marcus, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I want to take that second option. I want to learn how to do this right. Marcus extended his hand. Then let's get to work. 6 months later, the transformation of Sterling & Associates had become a business school case study. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by 340%. Client retention was at an all-time high. The company's stock price had risen by 85%, making Marcus's prediction about unrealized value remarkably accurate. More importantly, 47 employees were now earning living wages, had comprehensive benefits, and owned equity stakes in the company's success. The janitor, who had once worked alongside Marcus, an elderly man named Robert who had been with the company for 18 years, had just purchased his first home with his profit-sharing bonus. Dorothy Washington had been hired as a consultant to help implement the customer experience program, and her granddaughter had received a college scholarship from the company's new education fund. James Sterling III had started in the mailroom and was working his way up through the organization, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. His colleagues were surprised to discover that without his inherited authority, he was actually quite capable and eager to learn. The real victory wasn't financial, it was human. On the anniversary of his revelation, Marcus stood in the same conference room where everything had changed. But this time, he wasn't alone. The room was filled with employees from every level of the company, celebrating their collective success. A year ago, Marcus addressed the crowd. This company was preparing to lay off 200 people to boost quarterly profits. Today, we're announcing our plans to hire 300 more employees and open a second office in Denver. The applause was deafening. But the real measurement of our success isn't in our profit margins or stock prices, Marcus continued. It's in the stories of people like Maria, who was able to send her son to college without going into debt. It's in the fact that Robert finally owns his own home after decades of renting. It's in knowing that everyone in this room can afford to see a doctor when they're sick and take a vacation with their families without worrying about bills. He paused, looking out at faces that were no longer stressed and worried, but hopeful and engaged. 1 year ago, I was invisible in this building. Today, I see every single one of you, and more importantly, you see each other. We've built something here that proves business can be both profitable and compassionate, successful and socially responsible. The lesson that changed everything. As the celebration continued around him, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about all the companies he could have invested in, all the easier paths he could have taken to increase his wealth. But watching his employees, his partners, celebrate their shared success, he knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do in business is simply treat people with dignity and respect. The quiet janitor who had once been invisible had become a catalyst for change that rippled far beyond Sterling & Associates. Other companies were beginning to adopt similar models, and a movement was growing toward businesses that measured success by more than just financial returns. Marcus Williams had proven that true leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about serving from within, understanding every level of an organization, and recognizing that a company's greatest asset is always its people. And in a world where many had forgotten that lesson, his 3 years of invisible service had illuminated a truth that would transform not just one company, but an entire approach to doing business with humanity in heart. The man who had cleaned toilets had cleaned house in the best possible way by lifting everyone up rather than tearing anyone down. The man who had cleaned toilets had cleaned house in the best possible way by lifting everyone up rather than tearing anyone down. The end was really just the beginning.